New York, 4 p.m. Rain fell steadily, painting a thin veil of melancholy across the car window. Inside the dark gray leather interior of a sleek black SUV, Alexander Reid, legendary investor and co-founder of Reid Sloan Capital, was returning from a $12 billion acquisition meeting. The glow of his phone illuminated his face, angular, exhausted, and seemingly untouchable, as though nothing could stir that heart anymore after so many years surrounded by numbers. Everything was under control. Everything. Until that moment. The car stopped at the intersection of 86th and Lexington. Alexander's eyes drifted unconsciously toward the rain-fogged window and suddenly froze. On the sidewalk among the rushing crowd and blurred rainfall was an image that made his heart skip a beat. A woman standing still silently holding a cardboard sign, "Please help. I have 2 small children." Next to her were 2 little girls, twins around 6 years old, soaked, shivering beneath a thin poncho, clinging tightly to their mother, like 2 fragile sprouts clinging to their last remaining root. But what Alexander couldn't take his eyes off wasn't the poverty. It wasn't a coincidence. It was her. Though her hair had changed her figure thinner, the way she tilted her head, the look in her eyes holding back the storm, it was exactly as he remembered, as if time itself had only been a thin layer of smoke. Maya Ellis, the woman who had left him, without a single word. And then, Alexander saw something that took his breath away. Around the neck of one of the girls, peeking from under her soaked shirt, was a jade leaf pendant. The only necklace Alexander had ever given Maya. On that final night, the night she vanished from his life, no explanation, no trace. He couldn't breathe. I couldn't make sense of it. Questions came crashing like the rain. Could that be his daughter? Why was she here on this street in such cold loneliness and silence? The traffic light turned green. The car began to move. Alexander kept staring backward, breathing uneven. His hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. "Stop the car," he said quietly. Marcus, the elderly chauffeur, looked up in the rearview mirror. "Sir, I said stop the car, right now." The car braked, hard tires slicing through the rain-slick street. Alexander stepped out. No umbrella, no coat, letting the rain pelt him like punishment. He turned toward the sidewalk, but Maya and the girls were gone. No trace, only a space, a shadow imprinted in his mind, and a question that began to gnaw at him from within. Why did she leave? And what had he lost without ever knowing? The rain had not stopped as Alexander Reid rushed along the sidewalk like a man chasing a dream he had long abandoned. He ran past countless faces, blurred heads moving swiftly beneath colorful umbrellas, but saw no sign of her. No Maya. No little girl's 2 fragile breaths, who could be his flesh and blood, vanishing into the rain. At the next corner, he caught sight of a flicker of thin poncho fabric in the crowd, and then the jade pendant flashed again, like a whisper from a past that never truly let go. "Maya," he called, his voice cracking through the rain, like thunder ripping apart a decade of silence. She froze. She turned. And in that moment, time held its breath. It was her, Maya Ellis, the only woman who had ever made Alexander Reid lose control in a world where growth percentages and profit margins could calculate everything. Her face no longer carried the glow it once had, but her eyes, deep, quiet, unyielding, still left him breathless. Not because of beauty, but because of the truth they were holding back. "What are you doing here?" Maya asked, her voice hoarse from the cold, from time to 1,000 layers of distance. "I saw you on the street, and then I saw—" His eyes shifted toward the 2 little girls clinging to their mother, cautiously watching the unfamiliar man. "I saw the necklace." Maya swallowed hard. She didn't answer. She just stared into his eyes, as if asking him in return. "So what?" They sat together in a small diner 2 blocks away, where the warmth of cheap coffee and the greasy air couldn't hide the tension between them. Alexander didn't know where to begin, because there were too many questions, and only one that truly mattered. Are they my children? Maya stayed silent, a pause so long it felt suffocating. The two girls, Sky and Nia, were doodling on the paper placemats. One of them, Sky, glanced up at Alexander. That look mirrored his own. Undeniably, you were a man who didn't know how to stop. Maya finally said, soft but sharp. And I was once a woman who waited for you to stop for 3 years. Alexander lowered his head. I called. I messaged. I even came to your office. I never knew. No, because you didn't want to know. Maya pulled a worn piece of paper from her wallet and laid it before him, a printed copy of an email. Sent that year. Subject line, I'm pregnant. Please call me. Alexander froze. He remembered that he ordered his assistant to filter out all personal matters during the first major strategic merger. No notice. No explanation. He thought he was in control of everything, only to realize that he had severed the very lifeline of his own life. You already lost the chance to be my partner, Maya said, her voice devoid of blame, only pain. Don't lose the chance to be their father. Alexander looked over at the two girls. One was sucking her thumb, eyes dreamy. The other sat upright, watching him closely, as if silently weighing, is he someone worthy of being called Dad? He knew he couldn't turn back time. But maybe, just maybe, he still had the chance to begin again. That night, Alexander Reid didn't return to the office. He didn't open his laptop. He didn't check his phone. He didn't read a single contract. Instead, he sat alone in his silent penthouse, staring at the jade leaf necklace Maya had returned, now resting gently on the table, like a quiet reminder. Some things cannot be repurchased with money. At 3 a.m., he opened an old filing cabinet and dug through archived emails. He found a string of messages from an address, mellis.art@gmail. Come 3 brief lines from 10 years ago. I need to talk to you. Please. Just 5 minutes. I'm pregnant. They all had been filtered by Margaret, his former assistant, the woman he had once trusted to handle everything deemed non-urgent. It hit Alexander like a punch to the chest. Not because Maya had hidden the truth, but because he had made it impossible for her to come close. He thought of Sky's sharp gaze eyes that seemed to see through everything. He thought of Nia, her light ringing laughter, and the deep hunger for love behind it. They were a part of him living outside the glittering world he once believed was everything. The next morning, Alexander went to Greenridge Park, where Maya had asked him to meet if he genuinely wanted to know what mattered. In his hand was a sealed DNA test result, discreetly arranged not out of suspicion, but because he wanted to be sure, so he'd never doubt again. Maya arrived right on time, like a woman who had learned not to waste her minutes on people who weren't worth them. She didn't speak much. I just sat beside Alexander, eyes fixed on Sky and Nia, playing near the fountain. You brought something? She asked, noticing the folder in his hand. Alexander nodded, but didn't hand it over. I don't want this paper to be a wall, he said quietly. I want it to be proof that I'm serious, that I'm not looking for an excuse to run anymore. Maya looked at him for a long moment. You always needed signatures, stamps, and evidence, she said softly. But love doesn't work that way. Alexander didn't argue, because she was right. And he was learning everything all over again from the very beginning. When the paper was unfolded, the number stood clear. Probability of biological relationship, 99.97%. Alexander wasn't surprised, but he trembled. Not because of the truth, but because of the responsibility that came with it. and because of the years he had not been there to love them. He rose and walked over to the two girls. Sky. Nia. His voice was gentle, yet strong enough to make 3 adult hearts tighten in unison. The girls turned around. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" He knelt so his eyes met theirs. Sky nodded, cool and guarded like her mother. Nia tilted her head. "What is it?" Mr. Alexander drew a deep breath. "Not Mr. I'm your father." The girls froze. Sky looked to Maya silently, asking for confirmation. Maya smiled, not resisting, not urging, just letting the truth speak for itself. Alexander continued, his voice catching. "I didn't know about you for a long time, not because your mom kept it from me, but because I didn't listen. I wasn't there. But I'm here now. And if you'll let me, I won't leave again." A long silence. Then slowly Sky stepped forward. She didn't hug him. She reached out her hand, a tiny hand but steady, and Alexander took it, grasping not just her fingers, but the last chance to become a father. That entire day, Alexander Reid couldn't take his eyes off Sky and Nia. For the first time in nearly a decade, meetings, stock indexes, and assistant reminders didn't interrupt a single real moment. He took the girls back to Maya's apartment. I had dinner with them, simple spaghetti. Sat cross-legged on the floor, piecing together puzzles with Nia, listening to Sky excitedly talk about her science project at school. Maya didn't say much, but for the first time, the way she looked at Alexander wasn't sharp-edged. It was suspicion slowly softening into trust. That night, he didn't return to his penthouse. He stayed on the old sofa in the warm, modest apartment like a real father. The next morning, Alexander woke early. He sat by the kitchen window, coffee in one hand, and the other the legal documents his lawyers had sent the night before. They asked him to sign a document confirming legal paternity rights standard protocol to mitigate future risk. But just a few hours later, his phone rang. On the screen, Dominic Hale, longtime partner and co-founder of Reid Hale Capital. Dominic's voice was ice cold. "There's something you need to know. Maya filed for full custody and emergency child support." The documents just hit the court system. Alexander shot to his feet, a buzzing in his ears. "What? That's impossible. We're rebuilding things. I just told the girls." Dominic cut him off. "I've sent the documents to your email. Look carefully. This isn't gossip." Alexander opened the email. His eyes locked onto the dry legal text. Plaintiff Maya Ellis requests sole custody of 2 minors. Monthly support is based on estimated income. Signature: Maya Ellis. He dropped into the chair, his hand gripping the phone tightly. Doubt began to creep in. Did Maya still not trust him? Was everything that happened yesterday just a performance? No, that wasn't right. He remembered Maya's eyes, tired but clear. She hadn't asked for his money. I hadn't demanded anything. He had even refused help when he offered. And then a dark truth flashed in his mind. Dominic. He knew his partner too well, cold calculating. The man who'd whispered in his ear for years, "Family is a weakness. Marriage kills ambition. Emotion destroys empires." Dominic wasn't just a business partner. He was the one who had built the wall around Alexander, keeping everything out, even love. Alexander opened the file again, and just as he suspected, the address listed was Maya's old residence. The signature, upon closer look, had apparent discrepancies. A forgery, a dirty legal maneuver designed to separate him from Maya and the children before he could fully return to them. Alexander rushed to Maya's apartment. He knocked hard, his face pale. Maya opened the door, alarmed. "Alexander, the girls are okay. What happened?" He held out the file, voice raw. "When did you sign this?" Maya flipped through the pages, her eyes widening, and froze at the signature line. "I didn't. That's not my handwriting. And this address, I moved out of there 2 years ago. No more explanation is needed. They looked at each other, anger slowly giving way to a deeper, aching pain. Alexander whispered, "Dominic did this. He wants me out of anything related to you and the girls. He thinks I'm getting weak." Maya stepped back slightly. Her voice lowered. "And you believed it." The disappointment in her eyes hit Alexander harder than any accusation could. He stepped forward, hands trembling. "It took me seconds to doubt you, but I'd spend a lifetime regretting it if I didn't make it right." The air tightened between them, strung so taut, it felt like everything might collapse. Then Maya looked toward the living room, where Sky gently tucked a blanket over Nia during her nap. "If you want to be their father, then prove it. Prove you're not the man Dominic molded over the last 10 years. Alexander nodded. "I will. Not to fix anything. Not to win you back. So I don't lose the last thing that's still worth saving." The Manhattan sky darkened that afternoon with gray clouds hanging low over the skyscrapers like an omen. Alexander left Maya's apartment with the warmth of his daughter's small hand still lingering in his palm. Sky had walked him to the door and given him a tiny hug, whispering, "Don't be sad, Daddy. I believe you won't leave us." That sentence reached the deepest part of Alexander's soul. And at that moment he knew he had to act. Not with words, but with decisions. With sacrifice. That night, the 47th floor boardroom of Reid Hale Capital, usually the setting for multi-million-dollar deal negotiations, felt like a battlefield without gunfire. Dominic Hale stood beside the projector, presenting the proposed partnership with the Swiss bank, Lantera. Share increases global leverage, expanded market share, the usual pitch. But Alexander wasn't sitting in his familiar CEO chair. He stood interrupting Dominic mid-sentence, voice low and resolute. "I'm stepping down as CEO. Effective immediately." A ripple of shock swept across the room. A startled assistant dropped her pen. A shareholder stared speechless. Dominic staggered slightly, then clenched his jaw. "Alexander, you can't be serious. We just finalized the draft of a $7 billion deal." Alexander placed both hands on the glass table, his gaze unwavering. "We've lost more than money. We've forgotten why we started all this." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and set it before Dominic. "This is a copy of the legal documents your team forged to file against the mother of my children. Forged names, forged signatures, and the damage to an entire family." Dominic went pale, but Alexander wasn't finished. "I'm not just leaving the company. I'm calling for an internal investigation. Not for revenge, but to clean out the system I once helped you build." A full minute of silence settled over the room. Then Alexander turned and walked away, unclipping the metal name tag from his lapel. A. Reid, Chief Executive Officer. Was an empire crumbling? Maybe. But a father was rising. That night, Alexander stood outside the elementary school where Sky was rehearsing for the winter musical. He carried a small backpack, not filled with contracts, but a box of homemade muffins. Maya approached from behind, standing beside him under the dim streetlight. "You just resigned?" she asked. Alexander nodded. The answer was soft, but it carried the weight of a lifetime's ambition. "I chose the girls. I chose you. Whether or not you accept that, it's still my choice." Maya didn't reply immediately, but in her eyes, he no longer saw the guarded woman. She looked like a mother, seeing the father of her children growing up all over again. "I haven't forgiven you," she said, "but I see that you're trying." Alexander smiled, not with pride, but with gratitude. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I want to be present." Sky's laughter echoed from the rehearsal room, mingling with the sound of an old upright piano. Alexander Reid, once a titan of Manhattan's financial world, stood silently outside the wooden door of an elementary school, and knew with certainty this is where he was needed most. That night, Alexander's penthouse was silent, a kind of silence he hadn't felt in all his 10 years as CEO. No email notifications, no back-to-back meeting alerts from his assistant, no midnight calls from Tokyo, only the soft ticking of the antique wall clock. Alexander sat in the middle of his office, no longer a war room for billion-dollar deals, but a kind of forensic chamber for the past. He opened an old drawer beneath the filing cabinet. Inside was a dark brown wooden box, unlabeled, unlocked, just a faded sticky note with a handwritten message. Personal Archive, Q2 2015. Screened by Margaret. Alexander froze. Margaret, his former assistant, famously firm and brutally strict about one rule: no emotions in business. She had been tasked with filtering all non-financial content from his life during the company's expansion into Asia. He slowly opened the box. Inside was an old hard drive, dull silver light in the hand, almost meaningless, if not for what might be inside. Alexander connected it to his laptop. After a few minutes of decryption, a folder appeared. Screened. L. James L. James. It was Maya. Maya James. He clicked on the folder, and his heart seemed to stop. 3 emails. All are marked unread. Email 1. Alex. I don't mean to bother you, but I need to talk. It's important. Email 2. Just 5 minutes. I'm not asking for anything, just asking you to listen. Email 3. I'm pregnant. That last sentence hit him like a storm, even though part of him had already suspected it. But knowing is not the same as understanding, and understanding is not the same as facing it. He sat, frozen fists clenched. Those emails were sent 6 years ago, exactly 8 weeks after their last encounter. At the same time, Maya had suddenly vanished from his life. Alexander remembered he had been in Tokyo finalizing a landmark deal with the Senzai Group. He'd told Margaret no personal messages. He had once been proud of his ability to separate life and work. It felt like he'd locked the door that led back to his family. He closed the laptop, left the desk. He walked to the massive window overlooking the night-lit city, the skyline sparkling like millions of fragments of memories he'd dropped along the way. 6 years. Sky and Nova had grown up without him. Maya had endured it all as a single mother, quietly, resolutely, without a word of blame. All because he'd been too busy being a successful man. Now all he had left was a chance to start again from the scattered pieces. The next morning, Alexander stood before Maya's small apartment door. No appointment, no script. Maya opened the door, a little startled and calm in her mourning. Alexander didn't speak right away. He held out the old hard drive and 3 printed emails. I found the things you once tried to tell me, but I didn't listen. And because of that, I missed the first years of our child's life. Maya looked at him, slightly shaken. She took the papers, her eyes scanning the familiar words in her handwriting. 1 second, 2. Then she looked up, and now she asked. Calm, but not cold. Alexander took a deep breath, his voice low and hoarse. Now, I'm not asking to rewind the past. I'm asking for a chance to make up for the future. Not with money, not with promises, but by showing up every day. An old email inbox, a new man, a beginning, not too late. Tuesday evening. Light rain. The glow from a 3rd-floor apartment spilled down onto a quiet Brooklyn street. Inside, Maya was preparing dinner in a cozy kitchen. Nova lay on the living room rug, her head resting on her arm, and she colored a galaxy with wax crayons. Sky sat still by the window, her eyes watching the street below, as if waiting for someone. Alexander arrived right on time, just as he'd promised. This time, not in an Armani suit. No driver, no calls cutting in. Just a father holding a bag of fresh bread and a few new children's books. Maya smiled faintly as she opened the door, but her eyes quickly shifted to the girls. Nova was the first to run up, hugging Alexander's leg with a squeal. Garlic bread, like it was the most wonderful thing after a long day. Sky, however, remained still. The 6-year-old had the same gaze Maya once had, cautious, deep, and not easily convinced. Alexander knelt at her eye level. "I brought you this," he said, holding a book titled Daughters and the Stars. Sky took it, but didn't smile. A long silence passed. Then she spoke, her voice steady, but it made Alexander's heart sink. "Are you going to leave again?" The question hit like an arrow. No blame, no tears. Just the quiet fear of a child used to being left behind. Alexander froze. It felt as though every sound in the apartment suddenly stopped. He looked to Maya, who was also holding her breath. But this time, Alexander didn't turn away. He stepped closer, kneeling before Sky. His large hand extended, not to touch, just open, a silent gesture of promise. "I've been gone too long, and I can't undo the days I missed," he said softly, voice steady. "But if you'll let me, I'll stay. Tomorrow, the day after, even on the days that don't feel special." Sky looked at him for a long moment. Then, without a word, without a smile, she placed her tiny hand into his, and Alexander felt the whole world press gently into his chest. That evening, Maya made Sky's favorite soup, pumpkin and cheese. Alexander was given bread-slicing duty and story time before bed. While Nova yawned and curled up on her pillow, Sky stepped closer, still holding the book from earlier. "If you promise to stay," she said, like a little negotiator wise beyond her years, "I'll tell you my secret." Alexander nodded, his hand still carrying the warmth from her touch. "What's your secret?" Sky leaned in and whispered in his ear. "I used to think one day someone from the sky would come and claim me as their daughter. But now, I think maybe that person is just you." Alexander couldn't stop himself from embracing her. He understood then a child's forgiveness doesn't come from explanations, but from an adult who stays, still listens, and doesn't leave. After both girls were asleep that night, Maya stood by the window, looking out at the quiet night. Alexander walked over, standing beside her, and said gently, "You taught her to believe someone could come back. Now I must learn how to be worthy of that belief." Maya didn't answer right away. But when Alexander extended his hand again, this time not to hold, just to be present, she placed hers into his. No promises, no labels, just presence. Enough to begin again. Monday, 6:15 a.m. Alexander didn't wake up to an alarm clock, but to the soft giggles of Nova coming from the next room. A small laugh. Then Sky's voice, serious yet gentle, reading a fairy tale to her little sister in the teacher voice she liked to use. He stayed still for a while. No rush. In that quiet moment, Alexander understood. True love doesn't have to be loud. It just needs to be present. 9. Sarid a.m. 72nd floor boardroom, Reid Marlowe Capital. The meeting with international investors was about to begin. On the table, documents for an $800 million merger, a potential turning point that could elevate the firm to global stature. But the chair at the head of the table remained empty. Alexander wasn't there. Instead, he was standing in the courtyard of Brooklyn Central Elementary, kneeling to tie Nova's shoelaces, which she'd tangled from too much fidgeting. "Will you be here when school's over, Daddy?" Nova asked, eyes wide and shining. "If you want me to be." "I do," she nodded firmly. That answer echoed in Alexander's heart for the rest of the morning. 11 Hosru a.m. Maya received a text from an unknown number. "He didn't show up to the meeting. We're worried about shareholder confidence." She She looked at the message. Then I looked out the window. Alexander was sitting on the stone bench in the back courtyard, a paper coffee cup in one hand, an unopened folder in the other. Beside him, Sky was describing my solar system, including a planet she had named Dad. That afternoon, Alexander got a call from his lead advisor, a longtime friend and major shareholder. "What are you doing, Alex? This is the biggest acquisition of the year. You can't just go off-grid for personal reasons." Alexander was silent for a few seconds. Then he replied softly, but with resolve. "I'm not off-grid. I just found the one thing I once lost, my daughter." There was a long pause on the other end. "Are you going to walk away from all of this?" Alexander looked over at Sky, running through the playground, sunlight glinting off the sweat on her cheeks. "I'm not walking away. I'm just choosing the one thing worth keeping." After Maya tucked the girls in, that night, Alexander sat alone on the balcony. He opened his laptop and pulled up the resignation letter he'd written weeks ago, back when he still wasn't sure he had the courage. This time, he hit send to the board of directors, global partners, and to the man he used to be 10 years ago, the one who believed a father could be replaced by wealth. The next morning, the headlines exploded. Alexander Reid abruptly resigns, chooses private family life over record-breaking deal. Maya didn't ask. Sky didn't ask. Nova just hugged him tight and whispered, "Daddy, can we make pizza today?" And Alexander answered without hesitation, "We'll make pizza. We'll eat a lot. And no one gets to call Daddy during dinner." Night had fallen. Maya's small apartment was quiet, as if it were breathing. Only a warm yellow light filtered softly through the curtains. Scattered across the living room floor were the remnants of a day fully lived: crayon wrappers, a single missing sock, a fairy tale book with a folded corner, and a drawing by Sky, a house with 4 figures standing together hand in hand. Alexander sat by the window, a cup of tea cooling in his hand, eyes quietly watching the room next door, where 2 little girls were sound asleep. No stock alerts, no meeting chimes, only the steady breath of his daughters, and his own heart no longer alone for the first time in years. Maya walked over gently, sitting across from him. "Do you regret anything?" she asked softly. Alexander shook his head. "No," he said, "only that I didn't choose this sooner." He lowered his head and kissed the back of her hand. Not out of hurried romance, but as a silent thank you for surviving, for staying strong, for keeping 2 fragile souls whole when he wasn't there. She said nothing, but she didn't pull her hand away. On the corner table sat a newly taken photo. Nova grinning ear to ear, Sky frowning just a bit. As always, Maya with her head gently tilted, and Alexander simply looking at the 3 of them, not posing, just being there. Not everyone born a father becomes one, and not everyone who lost their chance is denied a second. Some love doesn't arrive with a lightning strike. It arrives with the sound of small feet on hardwood floors, a random question at dinner, and a surprise hug when you're most worn down. That's when you know you don't need anything more, because the most important thing is already in your hands: a family, a chance. And this time, you won't miss it. If something in this story made you pause, remember something you thought you'd forgotten, or made you smile, share your thoughts below. We're here to listen. And if you're ready for another journey, one that reaches the sacred within us all, watch the following video. Every story we craft comes with care, with love, for you.